The short version is this is one of his most important records. I think it's something, and I actually think that the reason to talk about it even more so on the anniversary at this point is we can come at it from a completely different context than we could when the record first came out. And I believe that's true because of the biography and then also Broadway. We know Bruce Springsteen, the person, much more than we did in 1982.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Set Listing Bruce. We are ending up September, our anniversary month, with an anniversary show. Frequent guest and my good friend, Mark Hornok, is joining me, and we are talking Nebraska tonight. So first, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thrilled as always to be here. It's strange to think of being called a frequent guest, but you are nice enough to have me back again and again, and it's a blast.
So we've got to spend at least a couple minutes. They were going to be 7-10. Once Dak was down, it's over. Put a fork in it. This team is done. We'll go through the motions. And all of a sudden, as we're recording this on September 28th, Cowboys are 2-1. Cooper Rush I'd say he's a little more than a bus driver. I don't think there's a quarterback controversy, but I do think after that long on the, kind of stumbling around, he's a good backup quarterback, and maybe there's life in him. So I know you love the Cowboys like me. What are you thinking?
Well, so after week one,
yeah,
it was difficult, and it wasn't just that Dak Prescott had got injured. They looked bad. They looked bad in a lot of ways, and it wasn't just he did not play well either, but as a team, top to bottom, they were not really good that day.
Yeah.
And I remember actually being at work that Monday, the day after, and I have a couple dates on my calendar. My son and I like to take my son, or maybe my dad and my son, or meet my brother and his family, and either go to a Cowboys home game each year, or even better, go to a Cowboys road game. Okay. So being here, in the Chicagoland area, they play later in the season, both at Green Bay and then at Minnesota.
Okay.
And well, yes, right now that sounds pretty good. The other part of that, though, is that at 0-1 with an injured quarterback and everything looking horrible, all I could think to myself is, I'm not going to waste my time driving to Green Bay or Minneapolis to see a team that's already been eliminated from the playoffs. Now there's a glimmer of hope. There's a defense that looks pretty amazing. There's a running game that's, kind of holding up, and there is no quarterback controversy. Don't let anyone mislead you. Yes. But Cooper Rush has done everything you would hope for a guy put in the situation he was put in. And at the very least, if Dak Prescott comes back in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the season's not over, and they're still right in the thick of it.
Yeah, and I do think he's made himself a little money. I think either Dallas will come back and say, hey, look, you're comfortable here. We paid you $1 million. Let's figure out a way to keep you here a little bit longer, or someone else will try to go. I have to, and I promise listeners we're going to move to music in a minute, but I was just dog cussing the drafting of Tyler Smith. I'm like, this guy, he's a the team that had so many penalties, they pick the lineman that is the most penalized lineman in his conference. And 3 games in, I'm going, well, maybe there's a reason why I don't do this for a living, because he's showing a lot of potential.
He is showing a lot of potential. He's actually played really well. I think I felt a little bit like you did, although that is a position they needed to draft at.
Right.
I don't know if I have faith in the front office at all, or if maybe I should or shouldn't. I totally believe Micah Parsons fell in their lap much more than that's who they were targeting.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe that happened here as well, But at the very least, if you want to, there's all sorts of reasons to be negative, but they have back-to-back legitimate stars that they've drafted
Yeah.
in the first round. And at the very least, that's keeping them. Those two guys have made a huge difference after 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I love eating crow because, and on my buddy Gary talked about, he was down on Parson. He's like, this is horrible. He's a bad dude. And he says, now then, I apologize for everything because he's a good dude. And there is a chance he could be, and you got to have a lot of playing, but he has the potential to be one of the best, So yeah, for fun, I put very early on Monday morning, and I think I'm going to do this every week, is I'm going to throw it open to any Springsteen fans that are fans of the Giants or the Washington football team or whoever we're playing, that I'll bet $10. And if the Cowboys win, your team, you have to give money to Bruce Funds. And then if the Cowboys lose, I'll give money to Bruce Funds as a little way to kind of get some goodness out there. So yeah, it is not, I have to pull back my fork. They are not done, and we will see.
We could have had a much shorter Cowboys conversation if things looked different.
We would not be talking about them at all. But speaking of bleak, let's move to Nebraska. So
you are the king of the segue.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So Nebraska is its anniversary. And so you reached out to me and said, hey, Jesse, any way you would want to talk about it? And I said, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit why you wanted to talk Nebraska.
So Nebraska, and we can both get into how we discovered it or when we started listening to it or whatever. But the short version is this is one of his most important records. I think it's something, and I actually think that the reason to talk about it even more so on the anniversary at this point is we can come at it from a completely different context than we could when the record first came out. And I believe that's true because of the biography and then also Broadway. We know Bruce Springsteen, the person, much more than we did in 1982. In 1982, he was a rock star like anybody else. He was up on the stage and he had that superhero thing that we have with a lot of our rock stars. But when you get down to it, what you find out was this was a guy, like a lot of us, going through a really hard time, feeling bleak about some things, feeling lonely, dealing with depression that at that point he did not understand, the depression of growing, or the depression of his father that he grew up with that he did not understand at this point. We get to see this record today from a completely different place than we did all those years ago. The other thing that I think is important about Nebraska is this was the beginning of the idea, and it was unintended, but it was the beginning of the idea that Bruce could work outside of the E Street Band. You can debate how you feel about that. You can, if it's a good idea, if it's a bad idea. We have this non-E Street Band record coming out soon, but the short version is from that point forward, Bruce understood that he didn't have to do it exactly the same way. And basically, after he finished Born in the USA up right after Nebraska, it's now become the unusual situation that the full E Street Band is in the studio recording. The new norm is that he plays around on the farm and he puts this part in, and maybe Max drives in and drums one afternoon, or maybe somebody comes in and fills their part in. But it is now rare, and that really started by accident here in 1982, that the E Street Band plays together. So we know Bruce in a different way. This changed how he records forever. And then I think the last part is this record has had a huge effect on people, but also the singer-songwriter world as well. Atlantic City, I think by far is his most covered song. That's clearly not the most famous Bruce Springsteen song. It's not Born to Run or Thunder Road. But if you go into Apple Music or Spotify and you type in Atlantic City, the choices just never end for how many people have recorded that. And that's true of Mansion on the Hill and some other songs as well. There's a cool factor to Nebraska that if maybe some people don't like the excitement or the loudness of a Badlands or a Born in the USA, there are still people that love Nebraska, even if they don't necessarily worship Bruce the way that we do. And, I don't know what it is. It's different in some way. I think it's in I don't know if it's the Brian Hyatt book or another place, but just to kind of close up the thought, Little Steven says, that an artist could never, how did he say? He could never be closer to the audience than this. And the reason why was he wasn't singing for an audience. He was literally just singing for himself. And it created something different. And if you don't like produced, loud, energetic, sing to the back of the arena Bruce Springsteen, which I love that part of him too. But for people that don't, Nebraska still has a lot of meaning. So there's all sorts of reasons. And then as a follow-up, it's just so different to what he was doing on the river. And then again, afterwards on Born in the USA.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, and especially the mythos of this album. And the idea that this was just supposed to be demos. And then the mythology has built up, and similar to the John Ford, the man who shot Liberty Valance, right? The idea, after a while you print the legend, where Little Steven's like, this is the album. Like, we've been trying to make this happen, and the album's already there. I do agree, and I think there may be a little bit of the coolness factor of, oh yeah, Nebraska's my favorite CD. Oh yeah, I'm a cool fan, Nebraska. But I do believe that there is enough singer-songwriters and people that on wider genres, whether it's death metal or punk or grunge or even hip hop, that may say, oh, Nebraska speaks to me because it is so bare bones, and it is just it. And in a lot of ways, I think Western Stars is the closest spiritual brother to it or sibling to it, not production wise and not music wise, but Nebraska feels like a collection of short stories. Western Stars feels like a collection of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I just discovered a new podcast, the Story Song Podcast.
Okay.
And there are 3 comedians that pick a song like Taxi or Mr. Bojangles, or like Brandy, parentheses, you're a fine girl, close parentheses. And they do this whole bit about, why do you have to have their parentheses? You're writing the song. Anyway, they talk about story songs. And, and I've emailed them. I said, hey, I want you to be on my podcast, and you guys, let's do Highway Patrolman. Right. So I agree, and we're going to go through each track, but this was not a CD I picked up. I picked up The River, and then, I picked up Born in the USA, and, I remember Tone of Love, and I remember the box set, but then kind of moved off till The Rising. And so Nebraska was something I came in after I was already a fan. How about you?
Similar in a lot of ways. We talked about it on before on here, but like a lot of people, I was 10, 11, 12 years old when MTV was a big thing. And I was listening to Born in the USA and watching the videos. And at that point, that's when I grabbed on. So I certainly missed Nebraska as it came out. So that wasn't something I was aware of. And then over time, I definitely had the box set. So I was at least the live box set. So I was at least aware of those 3 songs, but those weren't the songs I didn't know. Those weren't the songs that I went and got excited about. They didn't grab me in the same way. And then, I started collecting the other albums, and I had almost all of them. And I would even say Nebraska was one of the last catalog albums I bought because, I looked at it and I didn't recognize the names. That wasn't something I'd heard on the radio. And then the other thing is, that cover is not, it's dark. It's a little bleak looking. And I think we've all been in a record store, especially when we were younger. And that's something you did more often. Sometimes you pick up an album cover and you were interested just by what you saw. There wasn't a lot there to make me feel that way. Now, I certainly regretted that later. So at some point I bought it just because I was buying all of them. And I listened to it and I liked it, but it wasn't until I even had it for a couple years in college. It seemed like my roommate kind of grabbed onto it at the same time. we just started playing it every day. And at some point, I just couldn't stop playing it. And at some point, I knew it inside and out. But I had that record for years before I really appreciated it and really fell in love with it much later.
Yeah, and I'm asking for a little bit of grace from our listeners, right? But even if you put on, like, let's say you're going to sample it and you put starting with Nebraska, that isn't a song that captivates you, right? It is, he's kind of got that singing voice and he's talking about a killer and he's talking about this is not Hungry Heart. This isn't, I'll Drive All Night. This is something very different. And when you start exploring it, like when you get to Atlantic City, and when I did Songs of My Life, Atlantic City was the song I never get tired of, because I think partly because of, you said, there's so much diversity. There's so many different ways that people can do that. And, I know that our buddy Ken Rosen, routinely does all the Dancing in the Dark covers, right? And a lot of people love to do that. But I think Atlantic City gives you enough of the depth of stories that it is. And, when you hear the band do it compared to someone else, you're like, is it the same song? What do you do? So yeah, I totally agree with that.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more when we get to it. It's one of my top 5 Springsteen songs. It's so good, and it's so good in every format and every version, and it's been redone in different ways, even by Bruce himself. And it's one of my favorites. Something you said that sparked a little bit of thought in me is you used the word kind of the legend or the myth of Nebraska or something like that. And a lot of that is true. And the truth is, you or I were not there. Right. But a lot of this first came out way back, I think, in the Dave Marsh book that came out after Born in the USA. That's where we learned, at least I learned, and then maybe some Rolling Stone articles, exactly how Nebraska was created. But a bit of that, I wonder how much some truth is, because as the years have gone on, the first piece of the legend was that, and even to the point, there was talk of naming the record January 3rd, 1982. Mm-hmm. That was a possible name, because the legend was that Bruce sat down with that recorder and recorded the entire album all in one day. And for the most part, that's probably true. But as you read more and more, and as Bruce has commented on it more and more, or Mike Batlin, who was the recording engineer there at the house, the truth is most of those songs were probably written over a couple weeks. Some of that recording probably happened back as much as mid-December. And what they probably did was on that day, put them in that final format and kind of recorded them till they were done. Personally, I love the idea that it was this great epiphany that spit out all in one day. But I think both Bruce and other people have said there was a little more to it than that. The other thing about the legend that sometimes I wonder about is, and I think this is directly from the Marsh book, I could be wrong about that, the idea that the only copy Bruce was carrying around in his shirt pocket for weeks at a time.
Yes.
And maybe that's true. The truth is, I don't know. But if you read, and you can actually see the letter and the song list in the songs book.
Yeah.
He sent John Landau a letter talking about all the songs and a song list. And I'm assuming he sent him a copy or a tape to refer to. Now, maybe that was one and the same. Maybe he sent him the only copy. But again, whatever the truth is, I love the idea that he was just dragging that one tape around in his pocket, because whatever the truth is, it emphasizes the point that you made. He was not recording the next E Street Band album. He thought he was coming up with a way to show them what he wanted to sound like, to not spend 2 or 3 years in the studio like Born to Run or Darkness or something like that. He wanted to speed up the process. And what he had there was probably a pretty good idea, and something completely different came out of it.
Well, and that's kind of like, the myth is Letter to You, right? As they all showed up, and I made when I was lucky enough to have Maureen Van Zandt on the podcast, I said, is it a sleepover? Do they all bring sleeping bags? And they're all like, do they go home? And, and as you start breaking apart, that some of these songs were recorded at different times and everything. But the myth is that Letter to You was the first time they'd had this studio all together in a while. And, the film is a beautiful film and shows. but I also love, and Terry Smith talked about this, that it was either I think it was Gary, or it might have been the drawing a blank. One of the members of the band, right? Roy said, "Hey, can we not try to beat the demo this time?" Right? Like you do the demo and then you come in and then we got to go, okay, we have to make that sound better than what he's already done. Is there any way we could just go in? And they all had their little legal pads and they started writing, and they came up with the songs on Letter to You. Once again, that's the Myth, and I'm going to buy it. I love the idea that Bruce is trying to figure out, how do I write these songs? How do I get them down? And instead of doing the little tape recorder like we all had, the cassette, right, that you push play and record at the same time and start recording, like, oh, here's something a little bit better for you, a little more high tech, which is silly now that we think about how low tech that is. And okay, let's do this. And and it goes back to, and I think there's a connection when Rick Rubin told Johnny Cash, I just want to get back to you and a guitar. Let's do and it becomes the American recordings. Pick songs you want to do and just play them, and we'll record them. And let's just get you back loving music.
Aren't we lucky he did that?
Oh, I mean, just in fact, a couple years ago, my buddy Charles and I, the one I do a Doctor Who podcast with, we said, all right, we both kind of challenged ourselves. Okay, pick 5 places if you could go back in a time machine, because Doctor Who's all about traveling in time. What shows would you want to go see? And I said I would want to go to that Cash show where Reuben was in the audience, and then be backstage to hear them talking about. That would be fascinating to hear them saying, hey, let's get you back to doing what you being Johnny. And Johnny ended up doing a couple of songs from Nebraska.
Yeah.
So there's that connection.
Yeah. The amazing thing about that, he did those not long after they came out. Johnny, if you go back, Johnny Cash did so many covers. He was always looking for songs to sing. But the 2 songs that are on that record are kind of, I think it's only 9 songs on there. It's a huge chunk of that album, and both those versions that he does are so good. I wanted to say one other thing you made me think of, and who knows if this is legend or truth as well, but I can't remember where I read this, which one of the books it was. And let me just say, if you're interested in all of this stuff in particular, all the books are great, but you can get so much information about all these songs. The recording part of the Bruce Bass website is invaluable. And if you want to get lost in there for a couple hours on a work day, that is a wonderful place to be. So thank you to whoever's doing that. But one of the things that I read as far as the recording, and you talk about him recording to that 4-track machine, well, then they eventually mixed it right onto a boombox that Bruce had that, you would record a tape on, a cassette tape like you and I would use back then. Well, part of the reason the sound is the way it is apparently that boombox had been dropped in the river at one point. He set it on the desk, and weeks went by or time went by and it didn't work. And then one day he hit the button and it just came back to life. And again, because these were not supposed to be professional recordings, they ended up mixing that and then recording that right onto this boombox that had been thrown in the river.
Yeah.
Strange. Oh, so many things had to happen to make this what it is.
Yeah. Little background, according to Wikipedia, and that's never wrong. In 2003, Nebraska was ranked number 224 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. It moved to 226 in the 2012 revised list and 150 in the 220 reboot. There are critics that say Richard Williams wrote in Q Magazine, Nebraska would simply have been a better record with the benefit of the E Street Band and a few months in the studio. I think it's different album then. And I know that is a lot of people wail. They want to hear Electric Nebraska. I think, and I'd love to hear your thought, I'm okay with the E Street live versions that we've gotten of the different song, I don't need a studio version of them trying to capture that music, that magic. What about you?
I agree for most of that. I never need to hear the Seeger sessions open all night again,
Right.
if we can keep that away. But it's very interesting. And I was lucky enough to be in Omaha a few years back when he played a good chunk of the record at an E Street Band show. And we probably will never hear all of that. And maybe it doesn't even exist as much as we all hope that it does.
Right.
Clearly they tried to record those songs, or at least some
Yeah.
of those songs. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a video going around Twitter a few months back where Toby Scott was at some sort of convention overseas, and to show as part of his recording technique, he was playing versions of Born in the USA through the process. Now, all those tweets have been taken down and the video seems to be gone from the internet, but what you heard was the Born in the USA that we've heard that basically came from the Nebraska session that's on tracks. And
Yeah.
you can obviously hear the finished version, but he plays some sort of version that is well in between those two. And I think the assumption is that Electric Nebraska, while incomplete, sounds something like that. And if it does sound something like that, I would like to hear as much of the work that they did. Who knows if we ever will? But the gist is, at some point, they decided it wasn't working. And they decided this was the album. And I clearly, I think it worked out for the best.
Yeah. And I do remember, I believe it was the Marsh book. There's been several, but the idea that, the Columbia is looking at this like, okay, what do we do with this? Right. And then how happy they were when he brought Born in the USA. It was like, oh, this is what we were looking for.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a little bit of my wife and I just rewatched the Ken Burns country music documentary.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yes. And there is the scene where the record executive is talking about Willie Nelson brought us Redheaded Stranger. And we said, the album sounds horrible. I mean, but we can't tell Willie that, and he's not going to listen to us. So, okay, we're just going to release it. And then when it bombs, he'll come back to us and we'll go, okay, Willie, now then listen to us about Works. He says, then it didn't bomb. It was a critical and financial success. And we kind of went, okay, maybe we should shut up and not tell Willie what works. Right. So Nebraska was not a huge financial success, but it is, I think, the very definition of the tortoise and the hare, right? It's the tortoise that just continually, slowly. And I do think that a lot of, if Born in the USA is the gateway album, I think to a lot of people going to Nebraska and saying, you think you know Bruce Springsteen, listen to this and see if that changes your mind.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts before we start getting into tracks?
Maybe not any other thoughts, but it's just, let's jump into the songs, because there's probably all sorts of things that are going to come up there as well.
Okay. All right. So Nebraska, we start out with the title track. Bruce is usually pretty good about most times he has a title track. Nebraska is not one of my favorite songs. It is, I don't dislike it, but it isn't one that connects with me. But then I am not I'm squeamish. I don't like a lot of horror movies. I don't like unhappy stories. So Nebraska has too much going against me for me to love the song, but I recognize its greatness.
So I can see all of that, and I can understand all of that. What happens here, I think, in the very first song is a tone is set that things are not okay. And maybe this is the most extreme version of things are not okay. Like I said, the opening song sets a tone, begins with a harmonica, but it's not Thunder Road. This is not that. This is not the invitation that we've talked about in Thunder Road. It's less bold. It's a little scary. It's certainly not inviting. There's a different mood here. as you talked about, it's the story of Charles Starkweather. He goes on this killing spree in late 1957 into 58 through Nebraska and Wyoming, and he has with him his girlfriend or girl, or some of that's a little unclear, but she was only 14 years old. So there's some debate actually to her involvement. Starkweather goes on to be executed, and I think the reason that's important is I'll come back to that in a second, but Bruce also probably, it sounds like, got familiar with this story through the Terrence Malick movie, Badlands. Now, that movie came out in 1973. There's no way we know when Bruce saw this, but keep in mind, this is, if it was late 70s or early 80s before Nebraska, there was no cable, there was no streaming, there was no VHS, there was no DVD. I like this idea that either Bruce saw it in the theater, which is maybe true, or did he randomly just catch this on some late movie one night? Well, I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that, but it adds to the mystery, because some of the images in the movie come right into the song. The whole idea, he saw her standing on her front lawn, just twirling her baton. That picture is right in the movie. And like a lot of things, if you go online, people have taken the time to make a Nebraska video out of the images from the movie, which I can't believe how talented some people are when I see what they've done in those situations. But it's really just amazing. But throw all that away. The song provides the central question of Nebraska, of many big questions in Nebraska. And, remember, we've learned more about this guy, that at this point, he wasn't always feeling good, or he was feeling isolated. He was feeling depressed at times. So it brings up the questions all in this song. Why do people do bad things? Do they do it in desperation because they need to eat or to pay the rent? Do they want to feel important? Do they need something that defines them? Or maybe, and this is the scary part from Nebraska, because the line is right in there, maybe some people are just bad. And I think we've all felt bad about ourselves, maybe not quite to this level for sure, but it provides the scariest possible answer. Maybe some people are bad, because Starkweather says in the song, he says, I can't say that I'm sorry for the things that we've done. He isn't sorry. He said, in fact, it was fun.
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole thing about it. And it's creating this image that maybe the world is a scary and bad place. And it is not. You're right. This is not a sing-along song. This is not something you're going to put on repeat. But as a story song, and for something that's job is to set the tone of the record, that's what it really does well.
Yeah. The other thing it reminds me of is back in right before Michael J. Fox had gotten sick, he was in a movie called The Frighteners, which was a comedy horror movie. And one of the spoilers, one of the ghosts that he sees is a ghost similar to someone like Starkweather. And, there is that, and he has a young accomplice. So I always think of that when I'm hearing the song. And I also think of the Batman movie when Alfred tells Christopher Nolan, when they're talking about the Joker, some people just want to burn it down. They just want chaos. And so I think that comes with that. And it does sit you in this is not Hungry Heart, right? This isn't Out in the Street. This isn't even I Want to Marry You, right? And so Bruce is going to take us on a different journey, and buckle up. So,
and all those are good points. It's not an accident that it was the first song, because if you go back to that tape that Bruce sent to Landau, they didn't release it in that order. In fact, all the songs didn't even make it onto the record, but they didn't release it exactly the way that he handed it to him. They put thought into the order like anything else. And this wasn't accidentally the opening track.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we moved to Atlantic City. Very early in this podcast, Jay Armstrong and I picked our 5 favorite Springsteen location songs, and both of us had Atlantic City as number 1. I I'm on the record. I do think this is definitely, if not top 5, top 10. It is a song that I love to cover. I have told the story before. I was in New Orleans. We were on Frenchman Street, and we were in a little bar, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and there was a guitarist, a piano player doing a stand-up piano, and a female singer. And they said, hey, the premise is we're just in the living room. He says, we don't regularly perform with each other. We're just going to have fun. And so they took a break. They were passing the hat, and, I was putting some money in it. And Linda said, go ahead, ask. And the singer said, well, ask what? And I said, I'm a huge Springsteen fan. And she knows I want to ask you if you can do a Bruce song. And she's going to roll her eyes because, no, you're not. And she goes, oh, Atlantic City is one of my favorite songs. I'll do Atlantic City for you. And I was just like ecstatic, because often you'll get I'm on fire, like if someone is doing it. And she did a great version of Atlantic City. And it was like, oh, what a great joy to hear this female soul singer do a version of it. So I just think it was his first video. And it is truly, you've heard the E Street Band do a lot of versions of it. You've heard them do it acoustical, and it's just a great song.
I totally agree. And I think something else that's important to bring up here, and I'll give a couple thoughts on some of the lyrics as well, but Nebraska has this reputation of, this slow acoustic record. And for the most part, that's true. But in reality, if you look at it up close, it's really every other song is actually a little more upbeat. And that starts with a slow song in Nebraska and then picks up with Atlantic City, and then it slows down again with Mansion on the Hill, and then speeds up again with Johnny 99. It does that the entire time. So comparing this to Ghost of Tom Joad, which is much slower and borderline spoken at some times, Nebraska is much closer to a hidden rock record, because that's what it was meant to be. But talking specifically about Atlantic City, so, lyrically, we talked about Nebraska asked if people were just bad. Atlantic City asked, what can make us do bad things? This is a question that comes up all through Bruce's work. It's easy to point out, way back to like Meeting Across the River as an early example of this. What's cool about Atlantic City is that he takes the question one step further. He says, if I do this, maybe the stain isn't permanent. And maybe I could still get back to the life I want. Maybe this mistake won't haunt me forever. Because he says, everything dies, meaning I could lose everything. This could be gone forever. But maybe everything, comes back. Maybe it's not everything that dies someday comes back. Maybe even if I do this thing that I know isn't right, if I do this thing that is different than what I believe, if I do it for the right reason, will I get away with it, and will everything actually still be okay? And that's a conundrum that many people have twisted around in their head when they have to make a decision about something. This guy's sounds like is in kind of a life and death type situation, but I've never heard anyone lyrically put that thought out there as well as I think Bruce has done here. I'm confused about whether or not I should do this. If I do this, am I ruined forever? Or maybe will everything still be okay? How do I know? There's so much there. It's one of his best songs.
Yeah. And, out in the streets, put on your best dress, baby, and darling, fix your hair up right. And this is put your makeup on, fix your hair up pretty, and meet me tonight in Atlantic City. There is a writer who wrote Beyond the Palace, and Sarah, and I'm drawing Sarah's last name blank, and I'll look it up. But anyway, she was in an interview talking about that she was not a Springsteen fan. Her dad was, and she had no interest in Bruce, and her grandmother died. And she was searching for something to listen to, and she had gotten a CD, a cassette that her dad had made her, a mixtape. And the song Atlantic City came up, and the idea, she had just lost her grandmother, and said, now everything dies, baby, that's a fact, but maybe everything that dies someday comes back. And she kept just dwelling on that phrase over and over again. And And the beauty of this song, right, is it their relationship that can come back? Because he talks about, right, our luck may have died, our love may be cold, but with you forever I'll stay. Is it their luck? Is it their love? Is that the spirit? And, the idea, all of us, to quote Harry Chapin, says, we don't know there's an afterlife. We hope there is. But the idea is there a way for our loved ones to come back to us, for we get to do that? And I think there is through memory. I think there is through song. And, just those two phrases, there is so much depth there. There is so much, that I think I'm sure there are college courses where they break apart these songs and talk about all the different meanings of it.
I love all of that. I mean, and however someone feels, even from like a religious standpoint, are you going to see that person again?
Yeah.
Is our relationship over forever? There's so many questions in here. It sounds like an easy story, but it's not, because those lines can mean so many things. And then at the end, like a lot of Bruce Springsteen songs, he gets on a bus and he's getting out of here to look for something better.
Yeah.
So there's some of that in there too, but it's just another piece where it's asking these questions that are all through Nebraska. And again, this was a guy that was maybe struggling at the time and living in this house by himself. And he's wondering, hey, are some people bad? If I do something bad, does it make me bad? There's so much of that there. And there's just not a lot of records that deal with this kind of thing.
Well, and the line down here, it's just winners and losers, and don't get caught on the wrong side of that line. You could see a younger Bruce Springsteen, he's not a kid at this point, but the idea of there's winners and losers, this musically, it's either a win or it's a loser. What if, am I going to be on the wrong side of this line? You could really get in some extra depth of, do I do what I want to do creatively, or am I Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, right? Like the Beach Boys are like, hey, I want to be a rock star. They just were talking about it. Mike Love's like, look, I like being a rock star. I like touring. I like having girls scream for us. I like making a lot of money. Brian, I don't care about, the Beatles. I don't care about Rubber Soul. I don't want to beat the Beatles. I want to be a rock star. And you're torn between that. So I don't know if that's what he was thinking, but that is certainly a vision of winners and losers, and don't get caught on the wrong side.
I love that line. And we talked about the covers a little bit, and particularly the band doing Atlantic City. And I love what they do there, because on that line in particular, he says he's south of the line. Now, what he does there is he makes it a little more country, a little more Southern, if that's the right word. But what he's also saying it a different way, but it still can mean the same thing. I'm below where I'm supposed to be. I've made a choice on the wrong side of the line. And rarely do you see someone change a lyric that is kind of that well done. So I love what the band did there by using the south of the line, because it's the same thing, but it made it their own and sounds cool too.
Well, and you can also, the idea of the wrong side of the tracks. South part of town usually is the badder part of town. Most cities, as they grow, the affluent move up northern, the northern suburbs, and then the southern is the wrong side of the tracks. It's the poorer section. So I think you could make that too, that I'm on the south side. I am the poorer side of town and where I'm stuck. So yeah, I totally agree.
It sounds like we could do an Atlantic City podcast at some point.
Yes, I think we could.
We both seem to have a lot of thoughts where we like this one.
Yes, I do. Absolutely. All right. So Mansion on the Hill.
All right. So we learn a little bit about Mansion on the Hill in some of the different performances, which are not a ton early on. Got played on Born in the USA, and then at a lot of different acoustic shows. Got played a lot on the reunion tour, but not with a lot of, not with the speaking you saw, but especially like, I think the 86 Bridge benefit, he talks about driving around with his father. They would go and see things and places that were believed to be distant to them or unreachable to them, or that house or that mansion on the hill was something that's for other people. That's not attainable for our family. So for a young man, for a young boy, Bruce Springsteen, he was led to believe he didn't even deserve everything. He was led to believe, hey, there's these places that are for other people. They're not for you. They're not for me. So not only did he look at it as something he couldn't have, there was this life that he couldn't have. He talks about during the summer hearing people laughing and lights shining at the mansion. Something is happening there, something he doesn't have or can't have. And he never seems to make any movement towards success in the song. Instead, we see now, instead of this kid, we see this adult here looking at this house. You know, you could, maybe you've driven past your old house from when you were a kid, or an old girlfriend's house to see what's happening, or just a place where you used to work or play or whatever. And you kind of you use it as a memory. In this case, here's this adult driving by these places and still having the same bleak unhappiness that he has back at the very beginning of the song. It's super sad and depressing, but it falls into this same idea that the world is not fair to everybody. Some things are good and some things are bad. And maybe you're on the south of the line or the bad side of the line. And maybe you're there permanently.
Do you know if at this time, is this when he has started discovering like Hank Williams? Because Hank Williams has a song, Mansion on the Hills, and the last verse is, the light shine bright from your window, the trees stand so silent and still. I know you're alone with your pride, dear, in your loveless mansion on the hill.
Absolutely.
There is a lot, right?
I don't think there's any question, because a lot of people mention that. A lot of the books will mention that Bruce was into Hank Williams at this point.
Yeah.
He had gone back and heard all those records. He absolutely probably cribbed the title right out there. And you're right, the title is inspired by the same song, in my opinion. In the Williams song, we find him at the end staring into that window of lost love you referred to.
Yeah.
The idea of driving past the house or looking at it. But really, the crazy thing, the Bruce song is even bleaker. He never even had the girl. He never even had the house. He never even had a possibility of getting those things, where maybe Hank Williams is talking about something I had and lost. What's so much more devastating or depressing about Mansion on the Hill, this kid never even had a chance to have these things and doesn't expect anything good to come out of his.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And it is, and I had not noticed the pattern until you brought about it, slow, a little bit fast, slow, a little bit fast. I'm not saying, slow rock, but there is an upbeat thing, like, because we moved to Johnny 99, another upbeat. I believe, and I've talked about this before, I believe there are scars you get as a kid that never go away. And Bruce's family were poor. They were struggling for money. And, and now then there are people that criticize, how can he talk about that? Because he's a multimillionaire. He now is half a billionaire, right? Just alone. But you don't forget those years, and we'll talk about this in a couple of songs coming up, right? But he mentions a couple of times, I've got debts no honest man can pay, and he has joked about, like, he had never played the IRS not once, and all of a sudden, when he became well known, the IRS came to him and said, hey son, you owe some money. So I think a lot of this was calling on him with that too, that how do I handle success, and the idea of he's been there where you've struggled for money. So
yeah, I love that. And then anyone that's been through a job loss can understand the desperation and the feeling. I mean, right at the beginning, he says he lost his job because they closed down the auto plant in Mahwah. So this is something that really happened. This is an auto plant that closed down not that far from him. There's a good chance he knew people in this situation. They tried to find a job. They tried to make themselves better. They were doing everything that they were told to do to find the American dream. They were looking for a job and they couldn't find none. Other things that are interesting about Johnny 99 is, and you see this a lot in Bruce albums, but as you see it a lot in Nebraska, is this use of proper names. Johnny 99, Ralph, Mean John Brown, or even a destination of the Club Tip Top. It
Yes.
makes all of this so real. And I bet if you lived in that part of the country and you happen to work at that auto plant, all of this feels very real as well. We're talking about real people with real life problems. You brought up the debts no honest man can pay. I mean, that's clearly a line that is repeated.
Yeah.
It's in Atlantic City, and then here it again. It is in Johnny 99, and that kind of reaffirms the ideas. These were not supposed to be completed songs. If
Yeah.
he's even said if I could go back, or if I had gone back, I would have changed one of those two. And it
Right.
happens again with another lyric
Yeah.
later on, but that just wasn't the case. But the other thing is when you have this feeling that you're not enough, or that your place in the world is going to cause you to do something wrong. The other thing is when you go through all of these songs, you'll see all sorts of times where he's referring to people in some sort of authority that's
Yeah.
over him. He loves to use the term Mr. Mr.
Yes.
happens all through the Bruce catalog.
Yeah.
You say Mr. to someone as some sort of respect. He's talking to judges, he's talking
Yeah.
to policemen. All through the record, there are people that he thinks in some ways have some sort of power over him or are even better than him. That happens in Johnny 99 as well. And it's just part of the whole thing. There's this feeling of bleakness as a result.
Yeah. And the bank was holding my mortgage, taking my house away. Now, I ain't saying that makes me an innocent man, but it was more than all this that put that gun in my hand. And not to get too political, but it's very easy sometimes for people to judge others and not doing the circumstances, right? Like, okay, why are you doing that? Well, you don't know the circumstances of their life. You don't know where they were raised, what they're doing, what's going on at home to do that. And the idea of that, there are reasons how this gun got in my hand. Unlike our first song where I just wanted, I think it'd be fun to go kill people. And this one, it's like, I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm just saying there were circumstances that put it. And I do love the line, if you can take a man's life for the thoughts that in his head, that, and, John Hyatt has a couple lines about that where I'd be, if I would be in trouble for the thoughts that are in my head. So yeah, this is a, and much like Born in the USA that has this trumpet, epic, theme to it. This is done quick. This is, this is an upbeat pace. Like when the band does it, it's almost a happy tune to it in contrast to the sad story they're telling.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's true all through the back catalog as well.
Yeah.
There's upbeat songs that don't necessarily have upbeat lyrics,
Yeah.
but you put it all together with everything you said, that line of debts no honest man can pay, that wraps it up so well. I would like to do it right. I am physically not capable. I have tried all of the right ways, and the world has treated me wrong. And it gets back to that question, am I good or bad? What kind of person am I? And is it okay to do something wrong if I think it's for the greater good?
Yeah.
Oh, some of those are unanswerable in a lot of ways. But this is what's racing around in his head, and what we hear over and over again. The struggles we all deal with, maybe on a lesser scale, but they're all real.
Yeah, they really are. So on my list of songs I have not seen live is Highway Patrolman. I would love to see Highway Patrolman. I will make the slight case that I think actually Johnny Cash's version is a slightly better than Bruce's. I think just because of the age and the character in Johnny's voice. But this is one of my favorite Springsteen songs. I love the story. I love the idea of right and wrong, the guilt of, okay, I got a farm deferment. I got to marry Maria. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I now have the guilt that my brother did, and he's got all that baggage. And, and they made a movie out of it. I mean, that's how in depth this story was. And I know there is not a song Night of the Johnstown Flood, but there should be. It sounds like it should be. So, okay, I'm done gushing about this one. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think you properly gushed because it deserves it. And the movie you're referring to is The Indian Runner, if nobody's seen that. And again, there's highway patrolman videos that have been made. If you want to go look for those on YouTube, they're pretty cool. And like you said, Joe Roberts is a cop. His brother has a long history of trouble. Frankie's the brother that went to war. He's troubled because of it. He often gets himself in a bad spot. And then at the end here, there's this idea that he's on the run and Joe chases him in the car. And at some point, Joe lets him go. He's struggling again with choices. And this is such a different choice here that most of us maybe will never have to make. But, in the face of right or wrong, what do I do for my family? It's coming in there again. It's in there over and over again in a completely different way here. Should I let him off the hook? Where is the line? What is too much? What is too little? The deciding line, at least for Joe in this case, is that if a man turns his back on his family, well, that's just not good. That's a truth that he's comfortable with in this case, where a lot of these characters aren't finding a truth that they're comfortable with. They're asking a lot of the same questions. And that doesn't mean that Joe Roberts doesn't continue to struggle with this, but he's at least one of the characters in here that says, I know what I did and why, and I think I have a pretty good reason. Now, I think you said something else, though, that is super smart. And we talked at the beginning about how different we can look at Nebraska now after the book and then after Broadway. And you talked about the idea, that, Joe stayed home, Frank maybe went, and then we go back to Broadway and he says, I often wonder who went in my place. Now, that is a heartbreaking story in the Broadway show. And I never really saw that before. But in addition to those family dynamics, this whole song, Joe is feeling some guilt that he stayed home. He got the wife, he got the house, he got the job, he got everything. And here is his brother who went in his place and is kind of messed up and doesn't have it. That whole idea that somebody went in my place, in this case, it was one of my own family. Now, he didn't die over there, but he's not the same either. That didn't occur to me even the first time I saw it on Broadway. I think I was listening to it much later and I was like, there's some highway patrolmen in there. It's so good.
I had not connected it either till you just said it, and I agree. I've always said I'm not a fan of the blues version of Born in the USA till I saw it on Broadway after that story. And then I went, okay, I'm foolish for ever thinking that that's not a great version of the song. It's, the picture of, they're up in Michigan and, he lets them go to Canada and he's thinking of him and Frankie laughing and drinking and dancing with Maria. And, he makes that decision and, is the kid going to live? The kid's not dead.
We don't know.
Says, right. He says he's on the floor looking bad, bleeding hard from his head. So is he thinking, well, maybe it's not murder? What was the side? And it is just a miniature family drama movie that it's easy to say, well, I'm going to side with my family, or no, the law is the law, and it's gray and it's messy. And this song really tells that story well.
So the only disappointing thing, if you want to hear, and I know other people have done this, so I'll admit to having really nerded out about the song and sat down with a map and tried to make some sense of maybe where all this happened.
Yeah.
Sadly, it doesn't work. And either Bruce just didn't care or he didn't know anything about Michigan geography. But these places don't work or don't even exist.
Right.
Let's agree that I don't care.
Yes, I agree. And I do wonder if he was thinking of the East Coast, right? That it is very easy to get to Canada from the East Coast. So maybe he was thinking of that and not thinking.
But I have to tell you, the day I sat down with that map, I kind of thought I was going to see something special and I didn't.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I like it a lot. So we go from Highway Patrolman to State Trooper. So State Trooper is not one of my favorite songs. It just doesn't work for me. And I think maybe it's because I love Atlantic City and Highway Patrolman so much that we go through. Thoughts on State Trooper?
Well, I know where you're coming from there, and if I remember right, if you go back and read that letter he wrote to Landau, I think this is one of the songs he kind of talks about saying, "I don't know what I have here. It's not really finished. I don't know what this is, but I threw it on here." It's scary. It sounds scary. It's quiet, and then the end, you get those shocking screams that kind of just jolt you because it's so different than what you get about the rest of the song. What I think some of the things I think are important here, though, is the subject where we talked about he uses a lot of terminology of people in authority to him. This character is obviously scared. Maybe he's done one of those things that he wasn't supposed to do. Maybe he did it for the right reason. I don't know that we'll know, but he is fearful of getting pulled over. He knows what he did was wrong, and he's almost begging. He says, "Please don't stop me." He's not just saying, "Oh, I hope I don't get pulled over. I hope I get away with this." In his mind, there's this desperation of, "Please don't stop me." He's done wrong. He doesn't want to get caught. Instead of confusion about his feelings, he says his conscience is clear about the things that he's done, but he doesn't want to get caught. He's fearful of getting caught, even if he thinks he was in the right. I think another thing that's in here is just the idea that you put on some sort of different face or different image. Bruce has used the term masks specifically from the stage when talking about the image we put up in front of people versus not. Brilliant Disguise, I think, is probably the best song that talks about that. But the character here does not want to get caught, but he also doesn't want to be found out to be something that he doesn't want people to think he is. He doesn't want to be found out or caught and everyone realize, hey, this isn't the guy we thought he was. This is a bad guy. So as I said before, some lines repeat between songs. The idea we have here is this deliver me from nowhere. That is a bleak sentence. This is how far away I am. I am so far away. Can you bring me back from what I would refer to as nowhere? How can I get out of this desperate hole that I'm in? How can I get past the mistakes I've made? I'm nowhere. Is there any hope for something better? Deliver me from nowhere. And it shows up again in Open All Night. But that's a big line. That is true. That is a true hole you're in when you're begging to be saved from what you would refer to as nowhere.
Well, and you could actually see the imagery of I'm the main character, and I've crossed the line because I've had to. Right there's reasons why this gun is in my head. So he has compromised to himself because he says, I have a clear conscience. I've robbed something. I've stolen something. I've done something, and I'm smuggling drugs. Whatever he's doing, he is comfortable doing that. But he knows if he gets stopped, he is going to have to cross a line where either he's going to get arrested and his life's destroyed, or he's going to have to hurt someone. He is going to have to kill that police officer, that state trooper. And he said, maybe you got a kid, maybe you got a pretty wife. Just don't stop me. And there's been those scenes in Fargo, right? Like the first season of Fargo, I think, right, where Billy Bob Thornton's like, just keep walking. Just, you just want to go. And, and so he's silently saying that prayer because, state trooper, you probably have a kid, you have a wife, this is bad for both of us. If you stop me, I'm going to have to make a decision. I will not have a clear conscience, but I've gone too far. I can't turn back. So, I now want to go back and listen to it from that fresh perspective. Thanks for that discussion. That was really, really good.
I don't know that it was even all intended, but it's what came out. And you're so right about all that. And the spirit of it all came from is, I don't want to be found out to be someone that people don't realize that I'm this guy. Yeah.
So back in the old days, you flipped the album over and we get used cars. I grew up in a house where we always bought used cars. I cannot remember my parents ever buying a new off the model car. It was a new used car. And the imagery, once again, of being young, being poor, and the whole, and let's face it, you know, buying a car is never fun. Even if you have plenty of money and you have great credit, it's still just, it's very seldom you can like, okay, I like that one. Let's, you're still in there for like multiple hours. In fact, the past few times, my wife's like, okay, you go do all that. And then when it's time for me to sign it, call me and I will come. So, and the idea of this, I think of all of these songs, used car is the one that speaks to me most of being, my childhood, that being that my dad was a career military guy. My mom did not work out of the house. And I know they struggled financially plenty of times. In fact, my dad said, he said, their first house note, I forgot what it was. It was something ridiculous. And he says, and there were plenty of months where we were worried, are we going to be able to hit that house note? Mm-hmm. So how about you, Mark?
It's very similar. I have this there's just this clear memory of being in junior high, and this is the mid 80s, and at the time, a van, it was not a minivan. It was, the vans were different in the 80s, and my parents were shopping for a van. We had 4 kids, and I remember them test driving a couple really nice, new, beautiful vans, and at one point, the decision was finally made, and as a kid, you don't get this, but they ended up bringing home a used van that maybe didn't look quite as new, and it didn't have all of the features. In fact, we made fun, my brother and I, we must have been the biggest jerks, because we made fun of my parents because there was a little gold plate, and I think my dad eventually popped it off after a couple of years. But it said, this van was custom made for Don and Estelle Newman. This car was made for another family. This car wasn't even made for our family. And we always kind of got a kick out of that and made fun of that. But the truth is, there was also this disappointment that we didn't have that thing that we thought we might be getting. And I think everybody can understand that. And I'm not a big new car person, even as an adult, just because I don't know if I was brought up that way or my mindset that was that way. But, for the song itself, and I want to come back to what you said, because I think there's another cool piece of that. But this, I think you could think of as maybe a sister song to Mansion on the Hill. Mansion talks about that house or that place you can never get. This is a similar feel to that, and not being able to get the car, but really that feeling that you're something less because you can't get that new car. Maybe he was embarrassed because other people had something new and nice, and I have to live in this house where we can never have anything other than a brand new used car. Great line, by the way. The pictures he describes are so clear. That whole idea of his ma fingering the wedding band, you can see that in your head so perfectly. It's just such a great descriptor of nervousness and uncertainty. She's doing that because she's not sure what this means for her family. We talked about earlier, and it'll keep coming up, Bruce has talked about depression in his father, and the idea that his dad didn't have a lot of those moments in the sun where he was the hero or the big guy. And just a few weeks ago, and this is a total coincidence, but I'm so glad you brought it up, that whole idea of new car, used car. Did you ever watch the old version of the Wonder Years? I know there's a new version out now, but did you watch that show? Okay. So there is an episode where they have to get a new car, and Jack is shopping for a new car. And again, much like the story I just told you, he doesn't quite bring home exactly the car that maybe Kevin or the other kids wanted. But then, much like in the song, there's actual visual image where Jack brings that car home, and everybody from all over the street kind of comes to see the new car. Now, I think this is a lost piece of Americana, because I'm going to bet when someone gets a new car in your street, everyone doesn't come from house to house to see it. But that is something that happened. I remember that happening on my street. I remember that being a real thing. And like I said, I was listening and I rewound this part of the show because it struck me so much thinking about used cars, because there's Jack standing there with all these people around him celebrating the new used car that he brought home. And Kevin, the son, the narrator, he says that in that moment, Dad got to be king for a day. And that is what Bruce has talked about with his dad. He never got those moments. He didn't understand things. He was depressed. He was losing jobs. He was changing jobs. He couldn't find his place in the world. He didn't feel important. He didn't get to be what they call in the show king for a day. And when Bruce describes that moment of the song where all the neighbors come to look at the car, I can't help but think he wanted his dad. And when we get to my father's house, we'll certainly talk about the same idea. But he wanted his dad to have that moment that he never got.
Yeah.
He didn't get to have on a regular basis.
So a few years ago, actually longer than that now, but the company I was working with got an agreement. We outsourced part of our contact center to a small outsourcing company out of Port Arthur, Texas. And
Johnson.
yeah, and so Roger Shiloh was the guy who ran the center, and I think I'm a really good manager of people. I think I care about the people that work with me, and I think I'm really good. He always made me feel like a bad manager. And for example, Roger said anyone in his center, when they got a new car, they came and told him, and he's like, okay, take me around the block. And he stopped whatever he was doing and got in his employee's front seat, the passenger seat, and they drove around the block so that his employee could show off their new car.
I love that. I love that.
And we don't do that now. I don't know. I mean, I don't. And I think it's a sadder place. Like I'm now thinking like I want to, okay, tell anyone I'm working with, okay, when you get a new car, let me know, because I want to go around. And yeah, it is that. And and I also, every time he thinks that I'm never going to drive a used car again, and now that he can collect classic cars, so they are used cars, so he's gotten past that. But I also think of that scene in Gone with the Wind, right, where she says, I swear to God, I will never be hungry again. And Scarlett is like, yeah, God is my witness. And she is like, whatever she has to do, lie, cheat, steal, whatever, she's never going to be hungry again. And that idea, I swear, I'll never drive a used car again.
It's funny that we spend so much time on it, because I think of it being as kind of the forgotten song on there. It gets played probably the least of any of these.
Yes.
It's not talked about. It's maybe you could say it's a little cute in some ways.
Yeah.
But man, there is so much here to discuss and to see through a little boy's eyes about his dad and about what he wants out of the world and about what he feels cheated out of. I don't know why it doesn't get more talk.
Well, and I have Wikipedia up, and it's one of the songs that doesn't have a link. Like, Nebraska, Atlantic City, Johnny Nine, Highway Patrolman, Open All Night, My Father's House, all have links to an article. But Used Cars, State Trooper, Mansion on the Hill, and Reason to Believe don't.
Maybe we need to fix that.
Maybe we do. Maybe we just take this and transcribe it and put that on there. All right. So you're not a fan of See Your Sessions Open All Night. So talk to me about that, Mark.
It doesn't work.
Okay.
I like what they tried to do. Again, it's still upbeat. It's got it's fun, I guess I would say. I just don't think it works for the song. Mm-hmm. And I was happy I saw it once. I wish I didn't have to see it every time I went, but Open All Night is probably good exactly as it is. It's the fastest, it's the most rocking song on the record. I think it's probably the song he thought he could turn into a band song easier than any others. In the letter, he actually says it's hard to sing. I've always wondered what he meant by that. Was it too fast? Were the lyrics too quick or too difficult? Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening is it's perfect exactly the way it is. So it's this tale of heading home to see your girl, which is not uncommon in rock music. It's not as simple as that, though, for sure. Like a lot of these other songs, things are not great for the main character, but he's trying to get home in spite of all that. And the last verse has the toughest lines to hear. He talks about the radio being jammed up with gospel stations. He talks about lost souls calling in, something he can relate to. And then he says, "Hey, Mr. DJ, won't you hear my last prayer?" The idea that this is a last prayer, much like that guy in State Trooper begging for something.
Yeah.
This is my last chance. Deliver me from nowhere. Even though I've got this fast, upbeat song where it sounds a little more fun, the same idea is still in there. This is my last prayer. This is my last chance. It comes from a last chance in life kind of idea. And the next line probably sums up a good chunk of 20 years of Bruce Springsteen. Hey ho, rock and roll, deliver me from nowhere. Probably the most hopeful line in the entire record, because that's really what it did for this particular guy. It might sum up his life to this point the best. As bad as I feel, as many things that I'm struggling with, rock and roll is the one thing that saved me. Again, we heard that line in State Trooper. Here it is again. But that sums up Bruce Springsteen probably by 1982, a troubled kid 10 years earlier, finally gets a record contract, becomes a big deal. There it is. Rock and roll saved him.
Yeah, you mentioned him saying, trouble singing. I did want to share. I was telling you earlier that I was, as I record this, I went and saw John Hyatt last week, and he sang "Everybody Went Low" from Tiki Bars Open, and he said, I always worry about doing this one live because you got to sing a little fast, right? And so yeah, I guess that is, and I think that is one of the reasons why the Seeger thing is he's got a little different rhythm on that, going on that. But
also sings it pretty fast in that big band kind of way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. All right. So we moved to My Father's House. Truly, the famous line that was Bruce's father was asked, "What are your favorite songs?" And he says, "The ones about me." This is, I think, one of the highlights of Broadway. I think that there is a beauty that, I think that what's that phrase? You can't go home again. I mean, there's a little bit of that, and the idea of, last night I dreamed I was a child. This is not necessarily in reality. This is him, his fears, his feelings, and this ghost of his father. And I want to hear what you got to say, but I think your point of us knowing more about him when he talks on Broadway, that he dreams of his father sitting next to him and Bruce saying, "See that? That's how I see you."
It's one of the most powerful moments in the whole show. I love that he included it. That was so personal. If that was a real dream he had, what an image that was for, again, this father that wasn't necessarily successful, but you see your dad, you want him to be that hero. Maybe he was that hero to you. And Bruce had that same thing going on, no matter how much of a struggle their relationship was. That is, from beginning to end, that is one of the best parts of the show. It makes the song so much better. I like My Father's House 50 times more than I did, before 2 or 3 years ago. When other songs from Nebraska could have been on Broadway. There's other story songs. Used Cars, but probably would have worked there as well. But there's a pain here in the story. And you talked about the dream. I think this is such an unbelievable line to kind of really tell you what this dream is like and what he's dealing with and what he really wants. He talks about finally, he's going through the woods, he's in the dark, there's this kid that's scared, and he finally gets back to the house and he falls into the arms of his father in the dream. And he says, shaking in his arms. This is someone that wanted to be comforted by his dad. And here's this person that never comforted him. And that's what he is asking for. I want to fall into arms where I'm shaking and be comforted. And that's probably the reason that it's in there. Is, to me, that one line tells you so much. And then he goes on to say he realizes the dream is not real, and he says, "Well, I'm going to go back there and I'm going to go to the house." And he realizes, hey, maybe this relationship is permanently ruined because my dad has now moved on. Either he's moved away, maybe he's died, but either way, he didn't tell me. He's not here anymore. There's a good chance I'm never going to find out what a sad, sad moment that he writes so well. This relationship is just permanently torn. And then to go from there into the story that you just talked about and say, in spite of all that, I wanted to tell my dad how important he is. It's magical, and it's one of the best moments in the show, hands down.
Yeah, and then, we go to Devils and Dust, long time coming. Well, my daddy, he was just a stranger living in a hotel downtown. And when I was a kid, he was just somebody I'd see around, I remember, once again, my buddy Sam was going to go to Broadway, and I had already gone, and he said, my father's house, and I said, I, I think you'll be surprised. I said, I think you'll be surprised. And, I agree with you. Seeing that made me appreciate the song more. The other song that I liked was Independence Day, but I loved it when I saw it the 4 times on the River tour.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And him telling that story, and the idea of a father and son, a parent and a child, desperately wanting to love each other and not knowing how, and so this is, they used to talk about Lost, that all the characters in Lost had daddy issues, right? This is definitely when we know now, based on the book and his own demons and his father's demons, and the idea of he now has the grace to see, there was a lot of things dad couldn't control. Pop couldn't control that. This was, he was doing the best he could. And, and that, I'm sorry, son, but no one by that name lives here anymore. Bruce has written some sad lyrics, but there is a sadness about that it's too late. You've missed your chance.
Oh,
Your dream of working with your dad. And I am so glad that he later, he added the story about his father showing up and kind of apologizing that I wasn't very good, and, Bruce saying it was enough. It was enough to hear him say, I did the best I could, and to forgive that.
That you're right. That is such an important moment in the show, because it does bring some closure and some happiness and some of the life is okay moment to that story. You're right. It's later on, but it works.
Yeah. And you wonder then, when you hear the story, when Bruce will talk about, when the babies were little, it was good. He took the late shift. He stayed up all night, and all of a sudden, though, when they got there, and Patty is a saint in a lot of ways. And I think all spouses in their own ways are saints to each other, but the idea, you're missing it. Just instead of complaining to them, just, you're missing it. This is when they're most engaged. And the idea of, what are you going to do? You can cook breakfast. I don't know how to cook breakfast. Figure it out, And I love in the Obama podcast where he says, if everything goes to hell, I could work the morning shift at a diner and I could get by.
Good stuff. I love all that.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So, Reason to Believe.
The last one.
Yes.
So for it, I think you could listen to this song and you could have heard all of these struggles and all of these difficulties. And I think your natural reaction is to see a song with the title Reason to Believe and think, all right, here comes Bruce telling me about the promised land, or that everything's going to be okay, or I'm going to fight to get to the other side, and that there is hope. Hope being a big part of the Bruce Springsteen catalog. And sadly, but what fits in on this record is what appears to be a misleading song of hope. He says at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe. Not necessarily that there's a real reason to do it, or that things are going to be okay. You would hope and want to believe that this album ends with hope or positivity or a reason that things are going to be okay. But there is no promised land. And I think that's what gets summed up here. There's no promised land in the Nebraska album. I've always wanted to think there is, but there's not. Since there's a lot of articles out there right now and a lot of people doing podcasts exactly like we are right now, Peter Ames Carlin, who wrote a book a couple years back, he did a new article on Nebraska that just came out the other week. And he says, in Springsteen childhood memories, prayers go unanswered and work is unrewarded. And he goes on to say, love doesn't win. And I don't think that's where Bruce Springsteen is today. That's certainly not Broadway Bruce Springsteen or Grandpa Bruce Springsteen,
Right.
or Father Bruce Springsteen. But 1982 Bruce Springsteen, who was going through a hard time and we know was dealing with some of the things he's talked about, that was what he was dealing with. Love doesn't win. My childhood wasn't what I wanted it to be. My prayers could possibly go unanswered. And all of that is here. You know, the song talks about this dead dog that the owner falsely hopes will come back to life. He talks about a love that he believes in that just disappears. You know, it doesn't end on this high note. You can poke that dog with a stick for hours at a time. It's not coming back, even if you believe it is. And I would even say for the first couple of years or many listens, I thought, okay, there's Bruce Springsteen bringing it all back home and making it positive. And that's just not happening here. And it's kind of hard to listen to that way, but I think it's what he intended because it's the song that came out. And I don't think it's an accident. We talked about the list being in the order that some of the songs are. I don't think it's an accident that it's the last song.
Yeah, and I agree. For the longest time, I was like, oh, but even Nebraska, his darkest album, he ends with a hope. But then when you start listening to the song, no, there's no hope. I mean, you know, the guy's left standing for his bride. The guy who promises to support the family leaves. And there are certain followers of certain political parties that at the end of hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe. I will not go into too many specifics, but I don't think it's hard to connect the things that no matter how much facts or proof you try to give them, they find some reason to believe in a leader, it could be a political leader, it could be a religious leader, it could be, and the issue is belief can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? And if you are believing in things that help others and are good to others, that's a good thing. But there is other things where there is false beliefs and where you are going to you're putting all your money on lottery tickets that probably will not come true. It is a very bleak ending to an album that took us on a pretty emotional journey.
A bleak ride.
Yeah, it is a bleak ride. And I can see it would have been interesting seeing, after Bruce and John walk away, and I could just see the record companies going, what the hell? Like, what are we going to do with this? It does tell a journey, and it is something where I think in a lot of ways, this was something emotionally he had to get out of the way to go on to do his next step.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And he's continued to where, I am not a big fan of Ghost of Tom Joad. I like Devils and Dust more, but I do think it's every once in a while he comes back to, and I think we go back to your point. This taught him that I can create music on my own and I can work some of my demons out through this way.
Those are all true. And it changed things forever. And it wasn't the plan, because it wasn't the plan to do what he did, right, but it certainly opened the door.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. Any final thoughts? Though I've kept you for a while, I appreciate you staying up for me.
This is fun. I just looked at the clock, but here's what I would say. We talked about this album being so dark and bleak, but we both agree how good the songs are. And I'll just say this: Nebraska is a masterpiece. People agree, critics agree, fans agree. This is a masterpiece of a record. I would encourage you, if you haven't done it, go back now and look at it through the scope of Broadway and the biography, because I think it brings so much clarity to some of what you're seeing. It puts it in a different context than before. And then the other thing that I'll just kind of close with is what the other thing that's interesting that we never got to is in a lot of ways, this might be his most honest work. It told us how he was feeling at the time. And the reason I think that that is true is it's probably the only Bruce Springsteen record that ever came out that really wasn't edited. This is the record that got made in the bedroom. The tape went onto the tape, whatever we think about that. And then eventually those songs were released as is, which is why there's some repeating lines. There is not another Bruce Springsteen record out there that's not edited to fix this or fix that or change a thought, or is this really what I wanted to say? It came out as is, and that's what came out of it. Amazing.
Yeah. So Penn Jillette talks about that, he is a huge Bob Dylan fan, and he was talking about Blood on the Tracks and how, the story was, Bob just cut open the veins and the lyrics flowed out, and he bared his soul. And then when you go to the Dylan archives, there are notebooks of him working on that he edited and edited and edited and edited. And even though the persona, right, is that, he's Dylan, he just opened up and he flowed, and no, it actually was work. And I think there's a beauty to either one of those to say. One of my favorite writers is the guy who did Babylon 5, J. Michael Stravinsky. And last year he put out a book of how to be a writer. And one of the chapters is about editing. And he edits the chapter so that you can see it. He says, this was what I originally was going to have. And then he puts all the changes so you could see the final. I want you to see how important editing is in storytelling. And I've never thought about that before, but you're right. In this case, Bruce didn't edit himself. He did this. This is raw. This is from his soul. And I'm going to echo your words. After reading the book, his autobiography, listening to Western Stars, the film, because all the little stories behind that, and then Broadway, go back and listen to this with that fresh eyes. Think of that young Bruce sitting in his home with a track and a guitar, letting his soul come bare, I think gives you a fresh perspective. And I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and clearly he worked on the songs for a couple of weeks. So I'm sure there's papers written where this song was this or that. But at the end of the day, what we got wasn't the finished product. It's what came out of it.
Yeah, and I love that. Mark, this was a blast. Thank you so much.
I loved every bit of it. Thanks for staying up late.
No, I loved it. This is great. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
If you want to talk about Bruce or the upcoming tour or anything else, or especially the Cowboys, you can reach me at Twitter at Mark Hornok, MarkHornok.
Yes. And please, can't wait to hear about, we're going to get new music. And so it may be a cover CD. I don't know. I may do another reaction when we get it and do a quick, roundtable again to get everyone's thoughts. So Mark, take care, be safe. Listeners, you take care, be safe, go get vaccinated, go be kind to each other, and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at JesseJacksonDFW. You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.